Let me share my screen here. Figma. Okay, so like I said, I've been kind of looking at inheritance settings from the inheritance point of view. And while there's lots of kind of components of like how that should work, what it really means to inherit, all that stuff, that's not really what I want to get into today. One problem that I keep coming back to is it seems like regardless of what we do on all that stuff, right? How the mechanics of inheritance works, whole nother topic. There, I keep coming back to this problem that there's always going to be this need of space that we don't have in settings, right? If we want to like standardize on a way of inheritance. What I mean by that is
Mhm.
like largely, let me jump over here, sorry. If I go here, right? Like here are some examples of like how it is played out in our UI today, right? So enforce all
Yeah.
subgroups. The problem that I see
Right.
with this as any kind of like robust scale that builds out from here is that it's a checkbox that's a check, right? The UI that's required to deal with inheritance is
Hmm.
equal to and oftentimes more robust, right? If we build it out to a something more than just it on or off, then the UI required for it is always going to be like potentially bigger than the actual UI required for the actual setting, right? And that
Hmm.
seems like a
Okay.
pattern that will never be tenable. So I started looking around at like placements and things like that just to see if like maybe we could put a badge in there, right? And this kind of went nowhere for very much that reason I was just kind of talking to, right? Like the UI is equal to the size of it, right? Which kind of led me down this idea of, well, we might have to break it out by section. And then that's when I kind of started talking with Michael Lee and Katie about policies, right? Because that might be one solution is to pull this out of the UI and have some other kind of interface that deals with inheritance, right? Among other
Hmm.
things. So that's one option of pulling it out. Um, but I think even in that case, it's hard for me to justify that there won't be a situation where we're going to need that individual control where setting X and setting Y, I want this one to behave this way and I don't want this one to behave that way, which kind of brings
Hmm.
us back to this problem again, right? So all that was preamble to get to the point of what I actually want to talk about. So I think one of the problems that we run up against in settings is just a lack of space, right? Um, it's a lot, and I think a lot of the design choices that we've been making in settings over the years is to try to balance that like clear enough that users can understand it, but not so much that it's dominant and this page with hundreds of settings on it looks like a page with thousands of settings on it, right? Like it just seems to keep growing and growing and growing, and it just becomes more and
Hmm.
more overwhelming, right? I
Hmm.
see designers trying to like fit a lot of information into a small space, and I kind of feel like we're just past that at this point, right? Like our settings have grown to a point where we don't need that. So I started to think about like, okay, what do we do in that world, right?
Hmm.
And turns out the answer had kind of been in my pocket, or an answer. So this is, like I said, this isn't really like polished, thought through stuff. This is very rough. Um,
Hmm.
Google settings work very much this way, right? So what I'm describing here is rather than having the settings up front exposed to going more of a tabulated or list style kind of uh, a display mode and an edit mode. Um, and not overly prescriptive on what this might like. I'm showing a table here, and I did this because it had a column for inheritance, but this could be any other way, right? Like, let's not focus too much on like the actual list row concept here. It could be this, or it could be as
Okay.
simple as this, or maybe even like, right, this is probably the simplest version, right? But what this
Okay.
has on it is the name of the setting, the value of the
Hmm.
setting, and then a brief description of that setting, right? And if we needed to add on some other things like some sort of indication on inheritance, we've done that in list patterns other way. It gives us a little bit more space to give some more indications and things like that. But what I think that this accomplishes is a couple of things. So, like I said, title, settings value. I think it gives us an opportunity to be consistent. It makes it readable. It makes it scannable. Descriptions also help, I think, in the findability. It's not. So consistent, scannable, findable, and less overwhelming, right? To me, this or some permutation of this, a user being presented with this, is a lot less daunting than this, right? This feels overwhelming. This feels very much manageable to me. So, okay, so that's kind of one part of the concept here, right? Of ripping out kind of the edit mode from the display mode, allowing us to have a display mode that is, a little bit more standardized, whatever that might look like. But then we need an edit mode, right? So what I like about this is if we go with this extra mention, right, we start solving some of the other problems that we're in, right? So space, essentially, is what it solves. Gives us space for controls. It does give us like a potential to have a consistent editing pattern, consistent save pattern. So again, I'm showing a drawer here. It doesn't necessarily have to be a drawer.
Mm-hmm.
That's one option. Modal could be another option. Inline could be another option. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
this is all very rough, not been designed, but I think the core
Yeah.
concept that I'm trying to get across is like an extra dimension that is expandable and
Mm-hmm.
can fit the settings that are needed for it.
Right.
And again, like I was saying, so consistent, being able to put save buttons in the same place, but also having like a save pattern that's consistent. Right now we're doing it a little bit. Sometimes it's per section, sometimes it's per setting, sometimes it's right. The save patterns all over the place. If we had like an
Mm-hmm.
edit mode, an obvious transition out of that edit mode with the save button. But it also starts helping some other things, right? Like space for documentation, which would reduce the reliance on just pure help text. So what I'm saying is using this as an example. I just feel like we gave our tech writers this much space, or even if it needed to expand more than that, as opposed to like one line of help text below a checkbox, the
Yeah.
amount that we could describe what the setting does or a use case or tips or whatever, right? Whatever that might be. Like we also
Mm-hmm.
have the space for like explaining what these things are. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of the thought there. I do kind of lean towards a drawer pattern in this, mostly for the same reasons that like I know Nick is exploring the kind of drawer-ish pattern for like peeking in issues and things like that. What I like about the drawer pattern is what we're kind of giving up is like speed, right? We're if we go to this kind of display and edit pattern, what you're losing is the speed of clicking that button directly, right? I got to open this thing up and do that. But what's nice
Yeah.
about the drawer pattern is if I want if half the goal in changing a setting is finding it, right? So it's that ability to
Mm-hmm.
click between them quickly, whereas like a modal or something like else like that, if it expands, it might
Sure.
it's hard to switch back and forth between the two, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I like that it's switchable, but also it kind of has that context, right? Like if I have whatever setting set to this, I can see the neighbors, if we work out the AI on, or the IA, not AI, on that, right? Like the neighboring settings, the values and the names of them, I think being able to see those while you're editing a setting might become important. I set this one to maintainers. I'm also setting this one to maintainers, right? Like seeing the neighboring settings and what their values are while you're editing, I think has a benefit of the drawer over some other things.
Mm.
Um, and then just one other idea. So the thought on like searchability. Because right now, like we can search, right? But if you could search like title value, but if we were able to
Mm-hmm.
pull off also searching the description, it
Mm-hmm.
takes, I think it might have the opportunity of taking us from having to nail that exact word or not finding it versus being able to describe what it is and probably hit those words.
Yeah.
So I'm showing an example here. This is largely inspired by Obsidian. I love the way they do their search. So when they do
Yeah.
their search, right, like this description might be much longer than this, but they'll show you a subset of that with the dot 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 and the dot 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 that like matches where
Mm-hmm.
it matched, right?
Yeah.
So if so that's why I kind of push for descriptions on that list of the searchability of it is interesting there.
Yeah.
So then I did take a little bit of time and walk through like some examples. Um, and I chose this one purposely because I think this is one of the worst ones that fits into this, right? I like to
Mm-hmm.
like, let's find out if this works and what, in my opinion, what might be the worst type of situation. And the reason why I think it might be the worst type of situation is because like right now, this is a single edit form that kind of makes logical sense together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Name, avatar, description, that kind of makes sense together. And I think what this is doing is highlighting the downfall of this is the speed that you lose in doing that, right?
Sure.
But I would argue that like how often is a user really editing all of those settings, right? Are you changing the name, the group, and the avatar of your the description of your group that often? No, probably not, right? Like when you set it up, you probably are editing all of those things. But are you really going in and changing all three of those things at the same time? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think it gets to kind of the core of why I think a concept like this might be a direction we want to head in for settings is that I feel like we have optimized for speed up until this point. And from the conversations I've had and testing that I've seen that kind of hits on this point, like clarity, accuracy, understanding, these are what's important, right? Like speed, people aren't changing settings that often. It's usually I want to set it, I want to understand it, and I'm never going to go back here again unless there's a problem. And when there's a problem,
Mm-hmm.
I think clarity and, like conviction of what I'm doing is far more important than speed. So like I like this example because I think it is the worst of the settings that I've kind of looked at so far in this of like loss of speed. I can see users being like, I used to be able to do this in one form. Now it's three things. I don't like it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like in reality, I don't know that that really plays out. And if we
Mm-hmm.
really wanted to, there again, I don't think we should be overly prescriptive of the list items themselves. If you really wanted to put it all together, even in a format like this, you could, right? It's not exactly the um, prettiest thing in the world, in my opinion, but you could still group things together like this and then have a form that has all of them on there. Um, and like our form today is already like fighting this. The description field is you can put in more text than fits in the thing. Again, because we're probably trying to not push down the rest of the information on that page. So the text box, right? You can actually type
Mm-hmm.
longer than it, and then you have to expand it and all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're already kind of showing a truncated version of it. Um, yeah.
Okay.
So then the last one, just to point out here, was just like there's a lot of parts of settings that are already doing this, right? Like I took branch rules. Sorry, this is still permissions
Mm-hmm.
and features, but like branch rules
I know what you're
work
talking
this way,
about.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it essentially is a table. So
Mm-hmm.
I do kind of like the idea of if if things are going to be a table, maybe just everything's a table, right? But the one
Mm-hmm.
problem I will point out with this is this doesn't really fit with the title, description, and value is the row. This is more like
Mm-hmm.
this whole thing is the setting versus that. So might be a
Yeah.
little bit of a IA problem there, or maybe it's not, right? But
Right. Yeah.
and then the last thought here I just threw in here right before this meeting was there's, I'm sure we're looking at this and probably thinking like, well, that's a lot. That's a big change. I don't know how we're going to do it, right? Well, maybe section by section, right? Like once you all figure out how it's going to be laid out and what that's going to look like, right? If it does resolve down into
Hmm.
sections, like we kind of already have this pattern today of some things are tables, some things are not. So we might not have to do all settings at once. We might be able to take it section by section, and some are, and some are.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand where you're coming from.
All right.
Where would you like me to share thoughts or feedback around?
Um, Wherever you like. And do you want me to keep recording? I don't want to get too long on that.
Doesn't matter. Goes
Yeah,
to Google Cloud. I don't care.
Google Cloud. That's right. All right.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
okay. So first impressions, I definitely understand where we're coming from. Like our settings layout and structure is dense, and that
Mhm.
is feedback that we're seeing in our verbatims as well. And so feedback is like there's a lot there. It's hard to like read through. We've had tech writing go through several times and try and rewrite our settings to be clearer. So I understand the desire to want to like standardize the UI around it to make it a like consistent experience. I think the challenge that settings presents is there are configuration options that we care about inheritance for, and then there are other ones that we don't care about. So a good example you were showing was like, yeah, we don't really care if like the structure for the naming conventions of projects and groups are consistent. Like
Mhm.
maybe we don't care that we are allowing emojis or something and project names. Like, yeah, people can put whatever they want, but we are going to be strict about branch rules. Um, and so it kind of creates this tension around like what is settings really trying to accomplish. And in my mind, it's somewhat kind of like the problem between the individual like smartphone user
Mhm.
and the IT administrator that's managing 1,000 devices for their company. We're trying to use the same UI to serve both people. And that's where I think this tension is kind of arising because we're trying to both give that owner or administrator the power to lock down thousands of projects, thousands of groups, because that is the reality for some self-managed administrators. For some of them, they are going in and updating the name for 1,000 projects, and it's really annoying. And so then they resort to writing API requests because it's faster than dealing with our UI and jumping to different projects and different groups.
Mhm.
And then conversely, having to manage all of those things staying in check because even if we hire the best people, there can still be malicious users or even just well-intended, misinformed users that do something incorrect. Like maybe they unprotect a branch that they're not supposed to accidentally. Someone always drops a database in production. That's
Right.
always the fun part, right? So that's really where I think that UI tension has shown up is like we're trying to really serve two different types of realities because you have like on one hand like project, which are mostly just handling themselves, and so then we're like, oh, clearly for groups we should just replicate the settings UI. But then what really groups kind of became was like this container of projects, and then it became the like, well, if I have this setting at the project level, I should have it at the group level, and it should tell all the projects what to do, but only sometimes. But I do want it sometimes here and sometimes not there. So sometimes I want to inherit, but sometimes I don't want to inherit. And then it gets even more complex when we added on the admin area there because I
Yeah.
was like, okay, now the admin can see the groups and the projects, but then it treats personal namespaces and groups with projects differently. So then their inheritance models are different
Yeah.
depending on like what the setting is and how that's written. And then organizations adds another layer to that. So I understand like for both admin, organization, and groups, like they are more or less trying to like set the parameters for what ends up becoming their repositories underneath them. Um, and consequently, it then becomes challenging to just create one standard UI across all of them because all of the settings, they have a different intent. Like the permissions model is different than the CI/CD variables. Like I don't know if we can treat those one-to-one because I assume that they mean something different. And just like you're showing, like the general settings for a group or project, those are different than
Yeah.
we would treat how long a project can exist, if it gets deleted. They're just different configuration options. So where I've been starting at is not even at the UI level. I'm just starting to start like, what is a setting and why
Right.
is it a setting? Because that's the first question that we run into. And so that's where I've been at in my headspace for just like the last couple of weeks before getting into the UI. What I can definitely say is I've been trying to work with our engineer this milestone, understanding some of the underlying technical constraints. So you're bringing up the being able to index the page through search. We have technical limitations that are preventing that from happening. So even though we're like, oh yeah, like in the user experience, I should just be able to search for project deletion, delay or whatever, and it should be able to find it anywhere. It's like, well, it can't because of all these async requests that are happening to the database. And because of that, we can't actually index all the settings pages. So what we want to do right now sounds infeasible. And I'm trying to figure out, can we find a way around it? Or is this like just something we're going to have to live with?
Right.
I think that's one of the challenges that is maybe unknown to the designers that have thought about settings, is just there are technical reasons we've landed where we're at today, and we're going to have to find ways around them or get creative in the way that we approach them in the design to make them less frustrating. Because I'm like, yeah, why can't we just search all of settings? And it's like, oh, because if we actually did that, we need them all to be on one page, and we can't have them all on one page because, as I learned today, apparently just going to the CI/CD settings, it's like 18 async requests, and like you add that on to every other settings page, and then you have a page that no longer is performant, and then you can't do that. So there has to be like some sort of underlying investigation of like, what can we feasibly do before I want to really dive deep into like, what are the UI choices we make? Because if I get married to one, I'm like, it might not even be feasible yet. And I'm hoping if I can define like what is or is not a setting, perhaps that takes some of the weight off of settings if we can start moving a few things that maybe aren't actually settings out of there. Like you mentioned, people are usually going in here and doing things like once or twice and never touching it again, which is true if you're changing maybe the group name, but it's not if you're talking about CI/CD variables, which then makes me ask, like, is that really a setting? Or is that really part of a user workflow that's more of a feature? And we've really fallen back on settings just being the safeguard around things that we don't want to write permissions for. So example, this would be like, I just got a proposal to add workspaces as an option to settings that you can create your agent and whatnot, so you can have your remote development environment. And it's like, yeah, is that a setting? And then they're like, oh, this is actually kind of similar to runners, which runners does something different in the group. They have it like under build, and under projects, they have it under settings. So we think it makes sense to be under settings because they're doing that in projects. And I'm like, what you don't know is they're moving it out of settings and putting it in build.
Yeah.
So is it dissimilar to settings? Are you sure? Like, are you positive about that?
Right.
And
the other, I mean, related to that, like the discussion on achievements, right? Like we've made this choice, and it greatly simplifies things, but we've gated settings, right, by certain roles, which has this offshoot side effect of, okay, but for things like that probably don't rise to the level of maintainers are the only ones that should see them. Well, now we're behind this gate, and it's like, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna keep adding to the navigation and go there, or like if it's stuck in settings, it really limits the audience who's able to see it. So we either got to change that gating or change the placement of some of these things.
Yeah, I think that's kind of question to ask ourselves, because that could answer some of the questions around like, oh, this actually doesn't belong in settings. It doesn't need to follow this UI pattern. It's going to be its own feature and its own page. Something that moved out of settings recently was pages. That used to be an option under settings, and they did a lot of research around where users expect to find settings or the pages configuration options, and it was not under settings.
Because like pages was like one of the first things I worked on when I got here, and I was like, we gotta move this out of settings. And
oh, really?
5 years later,
full circle
conversation is finally like, coming back around.
And I think that's just the reality, is we've used it as a catch-all to throw things in, and to some degree, I think thinking about applying your pattern to things that maybe shouldn't be there in the first place is not necessarily a fool's errand, but it is just like a lot of work when really if we get to the root of like, what is a setting? Should it be there in the first place? Yes, it might mean an extra load on nav, but you know, that's for another navigation problem to solve.
It does seem like we
But
do
yeah,
need a like a I don't know what it is, right? But like there's that dichotomy, right? Like a lot of things have made their way into settings because we didn't
hmm
want to overload the nav. Well, if they can't
hmm
be in the settings anymore, where are they
they
gonna
gotta go
go?
somewhere.
They gotta go
Yeah,
somewhere.
and that's the thing is like we've been operating under this undefined paradigm. Like it's
Mhm.
just not written. So I'm just trying to write it
Yeah.
in 16. I'm just trying to write the hypothesis to then compare to these things. Like, sure, the like updating a project name, maybe adding some topics. Yeah, those are rarely done. But things that are done more frequently or part of user workflows, maybe those things need to be extracted out.
Yeah.
And then we can start thinking about, okay, with what we have left, we've maybe pulled out these 6 or 7 different things. What goes in here? Maybe we give each feature its own dedicated page and settings to help improve like the mapping between the setting itself and the feature that it pertains to. But even that I think breaks down to some degree because it's not always easy. Like code review in general is a conglomerate of a lot of different things. Like push rules are they're not repository, they're not branches, they're a combination of both with
Yeah.
commits, and it's hard. It's not just an easy IA problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
But you
guess where I
can
was trying to go
manage
with that is
branches. You can manage branches, right? That's a feature.
yeah,
Management of branches, but the rules
right.
associated with those branches, that's a setting, right? That's never felt
You know,
written.
it's and what's always like baffled me about that is I'm like, how do I know what my push rules are?
Mm,
And when I'm not an owner, like I just had to learn them
yeah,
by reading documentation. Which I'm like,
yeah,
why can't I just see that like who's allowed to push, who's allowed to approve before I create the merge request? That's always confused me. But I mean, inevitably it's because, well, we've hidden it behind the settings wall. And then to make it further complicated now, like the team with RBAC is like trying to like create granular permissions around settings. I'm just like, oh no, like what are we getting ourselves into?
yeah.
We're working around the problem instead of trying to fix the root. So all that to
I
say,
mean,
like I
RBAC
definitely
does have a lot of. I'm a big supporter of RBAC. RBAC solves a whole lot of problems, and when organizations become a thing, like RBAC, I think is gonna it ties in very well with that. Of
I'll
that's
admit
a
I'm
whole
not
other topic.
against RBAC. It was
Yeah,
more just like they're writing a specific permission to see CI/CD variables and settings. And I'm like, but what if CI/CD variables
right,
isn't in settings anymore? Like, what
right,
if it lives under the build
right.
category and like you have to rewrite that into something else? But that's just the nature of the beast of an ever iterating product. Is like things are going to change under the foot of us. But
Yeah,
it's
and that's that
specifically being
gate.
added because it was one of those features being gate kept. And like the
Right.
frustration is someone's like, I'm a developer. I have to see our secrets.
Yeah.
And what I'm waiting for is my maintainer to come back online on Monday and copy and paste the value to me in Slack because they're the only one that can see it. And
Right.
that's really frustrating. Like, yeah,
Right.
but you don't want to give that person maintainer access. Totally get that. But we've like, because we've kept this walled garden of settings,
Yeah.
it's created a problem that we're writing around as
Right.
opposed to saying, well, what if we just put this in where people
Yeah.
need the right access to it? Like, yeah, maybe that developer can't edit it, but they can maybe view it.
Yeah.
Or you could lean into that RBAC model and create a custom role that actually gives them maybe specific ways to actually not just see the variable name, but maybe they can actually see the value, or maybe they can only see the variable name. I don't know where they want to take that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I
just
mean
like the problem
that's
of settings is
yeah.
just ugh.
Yeah. That's kind of the exact same problem I was describing. Like
Yeah.
much like we gated like settings, we also gated at admin, right? As a whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
You're
Right.
an admin, you're
Right.
not, or you can be a couple other things, a reporter or
Sure.
whatever it is. It's something, right? There's
You
another
got
role that
admin,
and
auditor,
auditor,
and
yeah.
regular
Yeah.
are the three
And regular can't see
access
it.
levels.
Yeah.
Is that what it's called?
Access levels, yeah.
Yeah.
So same kind of problem there, right? It was gated, and now that
Right.
organizations, right, are more visible because they have to be. You can't switch between organizations if you can't see them. So
Mhm.
you have to be able to see an organization. Now
Sure.
that gating will be, it's the question is now opened back up again of it's not a
Right.
yes or no, admins or not kind of thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, I like I said, I I think I'm way out of like this is not settings inheritance at all. Like I said, it was more just a I knew in the back of my mind
Hmm.
somewhere I'm going to need a UI change of some significance that I need more space to deal with inheritance, right? And it led me down this path, and I liked it, and just wanted to share it with you. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
We're definitely we're not here yet. We're not to UI, not
Yeah.
certainly not on inheritance. It sounds like not
Hmm.
on any of it. Just wanted to share it with you,
Right.
just as I liked it.
Yeah.
It solves a lot of problems. Wrote it down, forgot to share it with you, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Happy to see ideas. I mean, I think it's always great to have different ideas in the back of my pocket as well. I'll keep it in mind. Um, I think out of the ones that you showed me, I like the idea of doing inline more than the drawer.
Yeah.
I think the drawer creates a lot of challenges, which like it's great on my ultra wide desktop. I have all the screen real estate, but on mobile
Mobile?
devices or even
No,
on your
that's why I
laptop
fell in love
itself,
with
you're
it.
covering up the content. I mean, you're covering
This
up the
is
content.
this guy right here is what showed me this pattern. And you can see why Google went to it. Sorry, I'm outing myself as a Google user. I know the iPhone folks will get mad at me for that, but it works so well on mobile. It works like they did it mobile first, right? Like I think this is like the drawer to me is the mobile first thing because on that it's just a full slide over, right? It's the drawer becomes just the new screen. I have the UI real estate that I need, and I'm back to the list. It works
Hmm.
swimmingly on mobile. It's what sparked this idea was mobile. So
Sure. Yeah, that's
um,
totally fine. But I mean, the point you're referencing was like you could still see the content to compare below it, except you can't
well,
on smaller
but
devices,
that's
which is
mobile.
where I think, yeah, which is where I think like even on like a laptop screen, on a smaller laptop screen, like I'm thinking of my teammates from Boeing that are using their puny like 11-inch Dell Latitudes. Like their screens are not as nice as our 16-inch MacBook Pros.
Right,
Um,
but even if it's if it's fairly obfuscated, like let me grab this guy over here and put it in there. It's gonna go the wrong way. You don't have to have much left, is what I'm saying, right? As long as you're getting the title and value, I think you still have the switchability. You're losing the description. The description becomes less valuable. So there's a lot of this that you could chop off that allows you to still do that versus kind of a
yeah, possibly.
clunky up and down.
Um, I think there's like I think the places where I see that this type of interaction become a debate
Mm.
is with things like access tokens, um, push rules being another one, or protected branches stand out too. Um, and I like the idea of being able to see the table in line with the fields that are being input, but I know that has like its own challenges as well.
Yeah.
So far I kind of like what Sasha did in a few of the inline tables because I think it's the best of both worlds where you still are using progressive disclosure where you're not just like slapping the form on top of the table, but you're showing the form once it becomes relevant.
Mm.
And you still have that content within the page, which I think is also a little bit better accessibility wise in terms of being able to get to it from the keyboard, navigating between items.
Yeah.
Um, but with all that said, I mean, I think there is value to progressive disclosure. The challenge that we'll have is we might have to sacrifice some of the indexing ability. So the things that are buried underneath might not be able to be discovered if they aren't already on the page.
Yeah.
So like those nested radio buttons you're showing, like, just example, like options allow or not allow, that might
Mm.
not be searchable
Right.
anymore if we put it in a drawer or if we hide it to begin with.
Yeah.
I can't think of a specific example where that would become problematic, but I think there are probably a few examples where it will be harder to find if those things are tucked away, which maybe that's okay.
Right.
Um, but it is kind of the trade-off. Whereas like now when we have it all there, we can at least search within that page everything. Whereas if it's disclosed away a little bit, we can't search everything. So
Mm.
I think about the companion of docs. So I'm like I'm like reading something. I'm like, okay, like when I was trying to find the um, classification labels and like trying to find stuff. Like I was looking at it in docs and just finding the key terms and then searching for it in settings. And because it was all there and not hidden behind a progressive disclosure,
Hmm.
whether that's like an accordion or a drawer or whatever it might be, I could find it by just typing in the words that I found in docs, which might not be as easy if we create this like 2-step, 3-step pattern to get to the
Yeah.
nested setting. But it's a trade-off, right? Because you are acknowledging like the benefits of the lighter weight reading version of the content.
Hmm.
The trade-off being like to get to the thing you got to change is a
Yeah.
little more cumbersome and potentially harder to discover, depending on what we can index or not, which it already sounds like given where we're at today, it already is not possible, which stresses me out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why I think like the simplified version probably, optimizes for that, but like that's why like on the ones which I don't think many there are definitely settings that inherit and there are definitely settings that do not, right? A issue name or a group name and a group description should never inherit, right? Like why would I want my projects to be named that below it, right? Although branch naming convention would argue that there are use cases when I want a structured naming thing, whatever, right? There are ones that aren't going to
I would
inherit
I
sometimes.
wouldn't be
Not
surprised if there
never,
was
right,
some sort of like issue of some company that's
right.
like, we want to be able to prefix all of our
Yes,
projects with
yes,
this
for sure,
label,
for sure.
Like we want it to be able to say like staging dash
Yes,
in all of our projects in this group. I would not be surprised if there's a
yes. I
proposal
mean,
for
we've seen it in branches, right? Like that's a thing in branches. There are issues
it.
about that. So
Yeah.
whatever. That was a bad example, but there are ones that
No,
may
I think
not,
I
right?
get it. Yeah. In general, like it probably is not, or at least we're not going to probably go that route of being like, okay, you're going to get to enforce some of the name things. The only thing I
Right.
maybe have seen was like being able to avoid specific emojis for like
Mhm.
abuse reasons, but I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
even remember where that came from.
That's where I think they will have some variants of like if we had this kind of layout, you can have ones there will be sections there. I mean, if there are sections, right? There could be
Mhm.
sections that had this exposed, so it was searchable, maybe filterable,
Yeah.
and then there will probably be ones that do not have it. But one more topic on search. So yeah, I get it. It seems crazy, right? Like we can see the whole. I can see the settings. What do you mean I can't search this? I understand values, right? Values get tough, right? So I have on there like it'd be nice to be able to search on title, description, and value. Value I get, right? That's a database thing all the time. But titles and descriptions, we should be able to cache that, right? That's static. That only changes with a merge request and a feature update, an addition or removal or an update to a setting. Like
Mm.
titles and descriptions should be fairly static enough that we should be always be able to cache that and search on that, I would think. So,
Yeah. I think
but
the challenge we have right now, because you're showing just like one page level depth, right? Just like settings,
hmm,
we can't go across the pages. And that's the problem we're having right now is we can't do that. But then we can't also put them all on one page because they won't be performant.
yeah. But I mean,
So
but maybe the solution in that problem is because I'm not under any kind of
I'm
illusion
just learning
that
myself.
the work to accomplish this, right? Like this is a whole nother layer on top of this.
Mhm.
This is a visualization of the settings, which is no small feat of work. But it might be possible in that body of work to make it so that the exported version of the settings is something
Mhm.
that's a little bit more performant in that, right? Because it wasn't never the initial settings today were never designed to be that way. But if you built an actual export, then I mean this is a form of an export. It might be performant. I don't know. I'm not an engineer, but it also might lead us down a path to policies, right? So policies is kind of the
Mhm.
idea of right taking these settings out of this and applying them globally. But I think the first iteration to that is let me copy and paste settings, which is in itself an export. right? So if you can copy settings from one to the other, then the next piece is just making it so updates propagate, right? And there you go, you have policies. So like, if we wanted to go down this route, it does seem like there might be some overlaps of like doing this also gets you this, also gets you this is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I remember coming across a professional services like offering that we have to just update like branches for people and keep them all in line. Like we have a group of people that just manually do that through
Mhm.
API requests. I'm like, and why don't we do that in the UI? Like, why does this require a JSON request across an API? Like, what is
Yeah.
going on? But yeah, it does go back to that tension of serving the bulk person and
Mhm.
serving the, no, I just manage one project. I manage a group of 10 projects. Like,
Yeah.
I think sometimes we are over indexed towards the companies that are really large and have a lot of things to manage. And we're fighting the tension between the two of like the big bank that's got 1,000 projects or 10,000 projects with, 5,000 groups
Mhm.
versus the team on premium that has 30 projects. And like their workload looks different.
Yeah.
Their level of care is different, potentially even. Um, and that has led to a very opinionated UI in different places, which then creates that inconsistent experience, which then leads to the what the heck is going on with settings, everybody question.
Settings is fraught with tension. I mean, just the like on the inheritance side of things, right?
Oh my gosh, I know.
The
It was,
if
dude,
the if you
it was
user
wild
test
trying to do with compliance. Yeah,
right, exactly. Like the compliance person wants there to be no control down below. If everything's locked down, then no one can cause any problems. And the person, at the whatever level below that you want to look at, well, they want to be able to do whatever they want to do unless there's an absolute reason not to, right? So like this person over here wants nothing locked down, and this person over here wants everything locked down, and they're the same, like we got to serve both of those. There is always this natural tension in settings.
right,
It's
right. And there's just a natural difference between wanting to lock down approval rules
mm,
versus enforcing projects to use auto DevOps. Like you might want them to just use that as the default. And some people might want to force people to use auto
yeah.
DevOps. But like it's more likely that approval rules are more restricted and locked down from someone above. Which I'm saying there's just like we were talking about earlier, different settings have different levels of care.
Hmm.
So it almost feels like by intermixing them together, we're communicating something different that like you should care about all these settings equally, but really like you probably don't. Like some of these are just more personal preferences and configuration options for the parent, like the group or project. These other ones are more like controls that are wrapping things that you care about and that you need to treat that differently. It's almost like that's more of the advanced work. This other stuff is just more like, yeah, you just want to add some pizzazz, like your avatar. You want to maybe set up an integration for your team to use. Like those things are cool. But when you start getting to like security and protecting your code, then it becomes much more of a touchy subject. And that's where teams push on the like, I need to be able to lock stuff down.
Yeah.
So we got, yeah, I don't have an answer for the UI and we'll see what we get to, but I would be very happy just to be able to tell teams this belongs in settings. This does not belong in settings. I'd love to be able to answer that question.
Yeah. But you're not going to like the question after that. Okay. So can we add it to the nav? No.
I,
Yeah,
I'm,
maybe if you
so
need to.
it's like,
Right.
I'm not necessarily opposed to adding it to nav. I think just one of the things we have to acknowledge as a company is like maybe just putting everything in nice tiny collections are not the way to go. Like we're a ginormous platform.
Yeah.
Maybe it needs to be more of like a cohesive library that people pull from. Like I don't know. I don't know exactly what the answer is for it. But one way or another, they're in the sidebar.
Yeah.
They're just one's up top and one's at the bottom.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, there are natural places for a lot of things. Like
Yeah,
keep picking on branch rules, but like, I don't know, maybe they could go alongside the branches, right? Like that seems like a
maybe.
natural landing place. If I'm gonna manage the branches, maybe there's a tab or whatever, right?
Yeah, it could be.
A near neighbor to branches is branch rules, is all I'm saying. So a lot of these things
Yeah.
that are, merge requests, there are merge requests, right? Very few of our settings aren't replicated by a feature. They're oftentimes settings of features.
Hmm.
So there may
Hmm.
be some natural landing spots for some of that stuff.
Yeah, and like I know Sid's like brought this up. He like compares us to like the Apple ways, I think is the way he's called it before, because we have a dedicated settings area, which he thinks of as like the settings app, which I don't think that's completely reasonable. I can see the parallel. And he's like, the inverse way would be going the Android path, where like each thing gets its own dedicated settings area. It's like, yeah, I mean, we could go either way. We just kind of do a bad job both ways. Like, you're right.
Yeah.
We kind of went the Apple way, except we didn't map them as well as they are well done in iOS. Like, I think there's still some flaws, but
Yeah.
like there's individual apps in your settings area that map to the app itself. Like, yeah, maybe there should be a branches instead of just a generic, uh, was it merge requests or code review or something? I think it's just like the
Yeah.
settings page, or conversely, like CI/CD versus build. Like, should there be a dedicated page for pipelines versus, jobs? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd love to get there eventually, but yeah, that's what we got to figure out first. Is like, what the heck is a setting? And then we can start talking about it. Okay, what goes where? And then go, okay, then how should we really make that look and feel? And how do we both enable the person that wants to do this across thousands of projects and groups and organizations? Hopefully not thousands of organizations,
Yeah.
versus the person that's like, no, I just set my first GitLab project.
Yeah.
Cool. I don't need all
There,
this power you gave me.
there is the third option though, right? Is it in the
What's the third
settings?
option?
Is
Oh,
it in the settings or is it near the feature? Both is my opinion, right? It's a digital asset. Why does it have to live in one place? We're not we don't operate in a physical world where things have, this cup is where this cup is. It's a digital world. It's the cup is wherever I want the cup to be, right? Like if I as a user want to get to it through a dedicated setting thing, why not, right? If I as the
mm-hmm.
user want to get it to it right next to right from the page that I'm on, why not as well, right? Like it's a digital world and things can be wherever you want them to be. It doesn't have to be in either or, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Contextual settings is something I've always thought we needed. A replication of the
yeah,
settings in
right.
context.
Yeah, like there's a pattern in pajamas right now that encourages people to link to settings from
Yeah.
the feature itself to at least say connect the dots. And I'm pretty sure that was Ian Camacho, like that was kind
Yeah.
of leading the charge in that one with packages and registries back in the day. Cause like that link is there. I think what is disorienting to users is how it readjusts your contexts. So like what I've been seeing, and I've seen that appear a couple other places now. Like, I think Michael A had it added to like the project overview page, like a little settings gear. And maybe even it showed up with some code review stuff. Like there's like a call out. I don't know what to call the UI elements, but I think it's under like the branches page or something, and it will redirect you to settings so your branches rules. And what I'm seeing is some of our like sus feedback, or people are like, I just moved from point A to point B and I got like really lost of like, where did I just go? It's like I teleported to another dimension and
Yeah.
now I got to find my way back. Or how did I even get it here?
Well, that to
So,
me is my biggest gripe with the Apple model. Is I was right here. Now I got to go all the way over there. And I got to
mhm.
click this one button. And I got to make my way all the way back to here
Yep.
and hope it took effect. Oh, no,
Yep.
it didn't, right? The round tripping of that seems like it'd be much
Hmm.
better served if it was shoop, modal, sidebar,
Yeah.
whatever second party, third or second dimension kind of UI is your flavor. Like, why can't it
Right.
just be right there?
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of feels like, let's say you're just looking at those branches and you click on that branch rule and we come at you with the entire toolbox. We took you out of the room. We gave you the toolbox. Said, "Ah, here you go." And you're
Yeah,
like, "Whoa, I just need a hammer." Like, I just need to see if there's a hammer and a screwdriver in there. Like, why did you just show me everything and take me out of my workshop?
And the worst of it is if you
Um,
had 1,000 branches and then you had to go, not only did you have to make the trip there, you have to locate the branch again, right? Like if I'm talking about this one specific thing that I just found through this other UI, I got to go all the way back here to talk about that guy, to go all the way back there to probably have to find that one again if I haven't, if my filters aren't sticky, right? So,
and even better, if you have more than 20 protected branches, it paginates, and when you go to the second page, it collapses all the setting sections.
yeah.
So cool. Extra
Uh,
clicks.
all right, right. Alrighty,
Anyway,
we're almost out of time. Thank you again for, like I said,
yeah,
I think we're way, this is way early. Just wanted to share it with you because I don't know, I like
sure.
the way it looked.
Yeah, no, I totally get the excitement around it, and I hope we can get to a point where we can start seeing an evolution of the UI of settings as well. Um, but yeah, I definitely am leaning heavier on the what is the setting first before I get into the meat of adjusting the UI, because what I feel like I've been seeing over the past couple years is we've deployed a lot of effort
Mhm.
to just adjust what's in place, and it's not making a difference.
Yeah,
Maybe some small incremental improvement for sure. Like I was saying, nothing's been better, but Michael did a lot of work on it. Paper Cuts did some work on it. Tech Writing's done some work on it, and we still are seeing the same problems. So we got to start, I think, at a higher level and try something a little more drastic, perhaps, to hopefully make a meaningful dent in the user experience. Or it could be wrong.
yeah.
So maybe this will just be a problem we'll never be able to address. I don't know.
Right.
All right. Well, good talking to you, Mike.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye.
Later.